Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to be working a bit in my sketchbook while I answer some of your questions. I'm sure this is going to be quite a long video because you guys asked me some awesome and really interesting questions, so feel free to have this on in the background while you're working on something yourself, or listen to it podcast style, because I'm sure you're not going to be missing any masterpieces that I'm working on in this sketchbook, which kind of brings me to, I guess, the bit of a disclaimer I wanted to put out. This is literally the first time I have drawn anything in weeks. I honestly cannot remember the last thing I drew, and before that I've just in general have not been drawing as much, so this was a pretty rough time of trying to loosen up my hand, which you can definitely see in some of these drawings. But anyway, let's get on to the actual questions. What do you like to do in your downtime while out of the studio / how do you distress from videos and business stuff? Now, when I first read this, I honestly probably laughed like a maniac, because just lately I am the least competent person to be answering this question, because I have been failing miserably in the work-life de-stressing balance whole situation, which this whole question and concept kind of ties into something that I'd been wanting to talk about or discuss for a while, and I just really didn't have the opportunity ever to bring it up. So excuse me while I go on a bit of a tangent, but I promise it's going to lead back to this question. But I realized a few weeks ago that I had unintentionally fallen into this really bad habit, because I was basically taking no breaks, and it's what on earth what's happening here? I know I was really busy doing a whole bunch of palette stuff, which, like I said, is really fun, but I was in a vicious cycle with that. And just in general, since lockdown quarantine has hit, I've just been kind of nonstop going like a maniac, because I just have stuff that I can be doing all the time. And it got me thinking that I had somewhat unintentionally developed this bad pattern, because quarantine created this second unintentional side effect, I guess you could call it, of I wasn't getting sick from anything. Now, if you don't know, I am type 1 diabetic, so I have no immune system, and last year was one of the worst health years I'd had in a long time. I was getting sick, I would be sick for 3 weeks, be fine for 3 weeks, and then be sick again for 3 weeks. And it was a pretty much non-stop pattern between February, March to the entire year, honestly, until January, when the last time I had any sort of serious, unforeseen, non-diabetic medical stuff happen. And that was definitely not the usual circumstance. Last year was just really terrible for my immune system for some reason. I just could not stay healthy. And because of that, I developed this really bad habit, because I would be sick for 3 weeks. I would not be able to do any work, make videos, whatever, so that when I was finally feeling better after that rough 3-week period, I would just do as much as I could, because I just did not know, I'm trying to play catch up for all the work I wanted to do in the 3 weeks where I was sick, and just generally finally being able to work, and so wanting to actually do stuff that in the healthy time I would pretty much take no breaks, not to an unhealthy level, just I wasn't actively worried about breaks, because I was then out of it for another 3 weeks, and that was kind of my break period. I was getting 3 weeks unintentional holiday, and then 3 weeks of consistent work. And that's sort of where this really bad unintentional pattern started. So 2020 rolls along, and January, I have been so ill. I have basically not been able to walk because of some undetermined abdominal injury. I didn't break any ribs, but they kind of also didn't really know what was wrong with me, other than I couldn't walk, sit up, whatever. So I'm just so out of it and down at that point where I literally haven't been able to walk for an entire month, that February rolls around, I'm finally feeling pretty good, so I'm just going at it. And then of course lockdown hits and I'm still on this really great roll. And you know, months keep going by, and because of quarantine lockdown, I'm not getting sick and I'm on this really great roll and I'm feeling great. And at some point it just sort of hit me that I'm basically unintentionally burning myself out because I'm just waiting almost to get sick, which sounds terrible, but I'm just waiting or expecting to have this unforeseen circumstance happen that forces me to take a break, and you know, that's going to be where my break happens and I'll worry about work later. Which even just saying that makes me sound insane, but that's the best way that I can describe kind of unintentionally where my head was. So obviously, still in lockdown, quarantine, whatever you want to call it, no germs are being fed to me, and I have honestly been the healthiest for the longest stretch of time because of this, that I honestly, probably realistically, since I was first diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Which I know that sounds crazy, but it's honestly probably true because I was diagnosed when I was 9, so I had constant germs in a school setting that would constantly be making me sick, and then just general germs being fed to me from being in contact with other people, and then lately my usual 2 times a year after conventions, which it's like clockwork and not even funny, I swear, literally the only time that I didn't get sick after a convention was when I was in a head-to-toe costume, mask, gloves, whatever. But my dad still got sick, and then he gave me what he got. But I didn't actually get sick from the convention itself. But that just, I guess, puts into perspective how terrible my immune system is. And that, of course, brings us to now, where I have been as healthy as anyone with a chronic illness can be for like 9 months now, and I am way more self-aware as to what is going on with my work-life situation and what is it that I like to do in my free time and to de-stress. And honestly, my answer to this is pretty boring. I mean, like, watch movies, TV shows, catch up on TV shows. I've been super into Lovecraft Country right now. It's amazing. But those are things that I generally don't indulge in, I guess you could say, when I am working, if that makes sense. Like, generally my entertainment tends to be more YouTube videos when I am not actively trying to, like, chill out. Like, I do definitely take breaks. It's not like I'm working, I am kind of, it feels like I'm working from, like, the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep. But I do take breaks, but those breaks tend to be more of like watching YouTube, playing like a Mario Kart tour on my phone. So not really in-depth engaging activities. Not that YouTube can't be like in-depth and engaging, but it's not like I'm really getting into like a 2-hour movie or watching like half of a TV show or something. And I am someone that really likes to stay busy. I need my mind to be active, whether that's, you know, playing a video game, watching a TV show, whatever. Like, I'm definitely not like a sit in the sun and turn your brain off kind of person. That just doesn't work for me. So it's not like I'm working myself like crazy. Like, I definitely will give myself breaks when I really feel like I need them, and like treat myself to watching a movie during the week or whatever if I really want to do that. But generally that's kind of where my work starts and like chill time begins. Another thing is honestly 3D printing, which I know has been creeping into my work more, but it is something that started off as more of a hobby free time type of activity, and I largely still see it as that. So I really love learning about 3D printers and constantly trying to improve mine, maybe making some upgrades in my free time, which obviously does benefit my business. But again, like I said, it is something that I still view as a free time activity. And that of course also includes actually 3D printing things for myself. Generally, I'm 3D printing products or prototypes for work stuff, so just taking a weekend and maybe printing myself some file that I've maybe wanted to start building, and then building that. You know, I'm really big into building life-size props and stuff, and just little things like that. It keeps me busy, but it doesn't feel like work, even though I might actually end up turning it into a video or something. That's like an optional activity that I don't really feel forced to do, so it's still a nice break, chill sort of thing for me. And since we're somewhat on the topic of 3D printing, that translates nicely into another question that I got, which was, tell us your journey into 3D printing. What software do you need? Why did you start? It seems ultra techy, and I loved watching you build your newest printer. Which, thank you, I'm glad you enjoyed seeing that process. I never know how much 3D printing I should ever show or talk about, just because it is so different to what I'm kind of assuming you're all somewhat here for, which is more along the lines of traditional artwork or just more traditional kind of artwork ideas and not like 3D printing, basically. Now, the nice thing about 3D printing is it is very much a skill that you can learn if you really want to call it a skill. It's kind of, I guess you could equate it to learning to drive a car. It's something that obviously takes knowledge and practice and understanding, but anyone can learn to do it if you want to. And I know when I built my last printer, which was like a few weeks ago, I don't know, time is an illusion at this point, but I basically tore that thing apart and was making kind of crazy modifications to it before it was even fully put together and working, which is also kind of what I did the time before. And I have been printing for less than 2 years, 2 years as of November. So if you told me like 2 years ago that I would be like soldering new fans onto a 3D printer and switching out main boards and doing all of this kind of crazy electronic stuff, I probably would have thought you were crazy. And I know watching me do that in a video probably gives this illusion that I'm like a tech wizard, but honestly, outside of 3D printing, I know like nothing in regards to that. Like, I learned how to do those things in relation to the printers that I own, and that was pretty much it. So definitely like not a tech wizard here. And what you tend to see me doing to printers is really not necessary. You can definitely learn how to do those things and teach yourself how to do those things if you want to, but nowadays you can get like a 3D printer for really inexpensive that you can pretty much just, I mean, they tend to be somewhat in pieces, so there's a little bit of assembly, but it's more like kind of IKEA furniture assembly at this point. So there is some assembly, but other than that, you pretty much can plug it in with a bit of knowledge of the few things and start 3D printing. I would say that it's important to have some pre-existing knowledge, but honestly, you could probably spend just an hour or two on YouTube kind of learning about the general basics and terminology to help you out with just 3D printing in general, and after those couple of hours, you'd probably be pretty much good to go. I know when you first start looking into it, it is overwhelming because it's like information overload with all of these different terms that you sort of have to know or learn about off of the bat, but over time it is really easy to grasp those terms, and a lot of them aren't necessarily that important. It is important if you ever run into problems with your printer, because that way you know the question to ask and like what term to use for what problem you might be running into. But once you get past all of the terminology, I think you'd be surprised how simple the concept of 3D printing is. All you really need is a 3D printer and a program called a slicer. Now, there are quite a few different slicers available. They tend to be free. Honestly, I'm not sure if any of them are a paid program. I personally use Cura, and what a slicer does is it basically takes a 3D model on your computer that you can download from a variety of different websites. It takes that model and it basically turns it into information that a 3D printer can read to then print that object. So if you've ever seen a 3D print time-lapse video, either from me or someone else, you will probably have noticed that a 3D printer creates a 3D print in layers, or slices, which is why the programs that you use are nicknamed slicers. A 3D printer actually pretty much works off of the same principle that like a die-cut machine like a Cricut or Silhouette machine works off of. You just add a Z-axis. So the program is giving movement instructions to the different motors. So for a Cricut, that is the X and Y axis. It's telling it to, cut circles or whatever. So in a 3D printer's case, it's also making those movements, but you're also adding height. I know that's like the pretty dumbed down version, but again, I never wanted to go like information overload because I'm sure that there's someone way more competent that could explain this concept and information if you're really interested in starting to 3D print. But as far as why I got into it and how I got to this point, the entire reason that I pretty much was interested in 3D printing to begin with was definitely for prop making and costume making, which is why I ended up with a CR10S. First, it's quite a large printer, but that's also generally the printer that people that are interested in the prop building side of things start out with, because it is very user-friendly. There's a lot of information on the internet for starters, so if you run into any problems, you can generally find the answer really easily online, which is always something that I mention to people that are looking to start 3D printing. If you are looking at a specific machine, see what kind of community there is online, because the worst thing that you could run into, I feel like, would be you're new to 3D printing, you don't really know how to troubleshoot any of the issues, and you've ended up with a 3D printer there is almost no information about online for possibly any problem fixes. So yeah, started out with a Creality CR10S, which is still a fairly highly recommended printer for beginners, although I feel like now you'd probably end up with an Ender 3 or some version of an Ender 3 being probably the more recommended solution, especially if you're not super into the idea of printing such massive objects, because an Ender 3 is extremely reasonably priced. They're like $300 US. They're probably even less now because they've come out with a lot of upgrades to it. So it's an extremely reasonably entry level priced printer, and it prints amazingly. Like, that is what I have pretty much two of, a couple different versions, but the Ender 3s are what print all of my products, and I also still use them for prop printing as well. And as far as I learned all of the information about how to 3D print successfully, I basically did what I recommended that you all do if you're interested in learning to 3D print as well. I watched a whole lot of YouTube videos. If you have a specific printer in mind, maybe look up specific videos about that printer, or if you're interested in a few different printers, look up videos. That way you can maybe see what assembly is like and might, just different reviews about printer to possibly help you decide on a specific one. But reviews are also handy because if there's assembly included, you can actually see what you are essentially getting yourself into, but also using it as a bit of a guide, because generally 3D printers aren't known to have the greatest assembly instructions, and there's generally a lot of things that aren't really included in the instructions that are good to check over, make sure different screws are tight and everything's squared up and level, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, it is a really awesome piece of technology that I am obsessed with. I know a lot of people probably view a 3D printer as just kind of this useless machine, or they see people 3D printing all of these sort of useless sculptural objects that really have no purpose other than just being an interesting piece of plastic that you made yourself. But I've printed like so many useful things. I've printed brackets, like wall-mounted brackets for different things, drawers, obviously all of the products that I create, so art supplies, storage, on top of the helmets and different types of props if you are into that kind of thing. If anything, it's almost enabling me to be more creative, because with the technology, there are all of these kinds of things that I would never be able to find the time or just physically be able to create if I didn't have a 3D printer. Like, for instance, I have like 5 different Star Wars droid life-size props that I like want to build and am somewhat in the process of printing and making. And I would never be able to find the time to create something like that. But with a 3D printer, I can print the different droid pieces, and it can just be printing on its own, and I can still be working on whatever else. Like, 3D printing is definitely not a fast process, which I feel like that's one of the most shocking things when people start to 3D print, is they don't actually realize how long things take. But when you think about how much longer it would take for you yourself to create that, or all of the things that you can do instead of making whatever it is you're printing, it's so worth it. Yeah, those are my thoughts for that question about 3D printing. If you guys are really interested in 3D printing and want me to talk about it more in videos, let me know, because I would definitely be interested in doing that, but I never want to like overload this channel with 3D printing content if that's really not something that a lot of people are interested in. Next question, which this comment has a whole bunch of them, which some of them I'm gonna rapid fire off. What is the most difficult art medium for you to use? I would say probably watercolor, which I know is one of my most favorite mediums, but watercolor, you have like no takebacks. It's not like you can cover up any mistakes because watercolor is a translucent medium. So I would say watercolor for that. What is your least favorite art medium? I'm pretty sure I answered this in the last Q&A, which my answer then was pastels, but after that I use them and I have somewhat sort of fallen in love with them in combination of using them with colored pencil. So I'm pretty sure my secondary answer was oil paints, only because I like never use them or can be bothered to try them out. Do you ever immediately recreate an artwork when it doesn't come out the way you envisioned it? I was trying to think really hard what my answer to this was and what the last sort of painting or drawing or whatever that I had not turned out as I wanted it was, and what I did in that situation. But I think for the most part I pretty much just try and roll with it and or fix it with another art medium, which I did sort of do that in a recent video where it was kind of ending up catastrophically and I managed to save it. But for the most part, I feel like right now, because I'm so busy doing so many other things, I have just endless amounts of pretty flushed out ideas that I have a really strong vision in my mind of how I want them to turn out, and because of that they generally end up turning out, or at the very least passable if they're maybe not 100% how I thought they would turn out, still like decently happy with the result. I know there are a few paintings that I have laying around where the sketching process was just not going well and they're still in that exact phase and I never bothered with finishing them, so I guess that's more of the realistic answer, that if something isn't going the way that I'm hoping, it just kind of stays that way, and I'm not really one for going back on ideas, because if I really like an idea, I generally am trying to get it right the first time. Which, wow, another excellent segue to other questions that I got. Do you do a lot of planning for art pieces? And someone else asked, how do you approach your projects or art? How long is your planning phase and your post-production, or all the things no one sees? I struggle to finish my pieces. How do you finish your pieces when you have so many ideas and work in progress? So for me, at least right now, I'm pretty not starved for inspiration. In fact, it's almost the opposite. I have too many ideas sort of written down in my back pocket than I have time to create. So what I end up doing is anytime I have like a super strong image or just idea that I really like, I will generally either write down vague description of said idea and it just like word prompts that will hopefully remind myself of exactly what that concept was, and or do a quick thumbnail sketch, which I have like a whole video that I'm probably going to do really soon about how I stay organized both with like supplies and also ideas, but that's generally what I'm doing. I have like a really rough thumbnail sketch in a book that if I need to go back and figure out something that I feel like painting, I will go into that and sort of look up what ideas I had previously and might want to pull out and actually create. But yeah, for the most part, it's that I have a really strong, for whatever reason, just idea of whether it's like brought on by some reference picture that I see that I really like, either the color in it, the lighting, pose of a person or whatever, and I have kind of like a mental checklist, which is again a video I want to create because I think it could be helpful for people trying to figure out painting ideas. But normally it's like a strong visual image that I then try and create as best I can in real life. Which, to bring it to more of the planning idea, if that image is quite a complex image or it involves more of a background or a lot of different elements, I will generally do a digital sketch to then transfer onto like the watercolor paper or a different type of surface, whatever it might be. So that's pretty much the only planning that I really do, other than maybe an initial thumbnail sketch, either to keep that idea just put down somewhere so that I can remember it later, and or also figure out possible composition. I'm pretty chill about it. I'm not someone that's generally doing like color scheme thumbnails. I normally sort of have that figured out in my head. I suppose that if I wasn't completely sure about something, I would go ahead and sort of mock up a possible color scheme, or if I wasn't sure about a specific element, I would maybe color it in a few different colors digitally to try and figure that out. But yeah, I'm pretty chill with the planning idea. I generally am just sketching it on the surface that it's going to be finished on. I very rarely have sketched something on like in a sketchbook or whatever and then wanted to flesh out that idea more, which if that is the case, I have in the past taken a picture of that sketch or whatever and then like imploded it or just digitally altered it or whatever that I need to possibly do to it to then transfer onto whatever other surface it might need to get finished on. But yeah, pretty chill with the planning and ideas. As far as finishing stuff, I almost have the problem of I don't even bother starting it. I know a lot of different types of mediums like oil painting and stuff sort of force you to be working on multiple projects at the same time, and I'm sure a lot of people have difficulty going back to those projects once they've actually been started. But for the most part, because I am working with watercolor and other more like fast drying, quick payoff mediums, I'm normally only working on the one piece at a time and finishing that up completely before going on to the next thing. I do definitely have unfinished paintings laying around, but I always sort of view that as if I really cared about the idea, I would make time to finish it, and it's just something that I'm not really as interested or inspired by, and therefore it hasn't been finished for one reason or another. On to the next question. What is your opinion on sculpture? I like how this one's phrased because it sounds like sculpture is like a controversial topic or something. But yeah, I like sculpture. I probably actually do it more frequently than either of us really realize because I'm not normally doing it in the probably sense that you're thinking of, which I'm sure if you say sculpture, most people think of either carving things from marble, wood, or doing the classic gray clay sort of sculpture maneuver. So for me, a lot of my more traditional sculpting, only because I like using epoxy sculpt for it, would be creating custom Funko Pop figures. So that's more of the clay idea. I also use epoxy sculpt for costume stuff. Lots of 3D printing has sort of taken away from some of my sculpting, I guess you could call it, activities in costume making, but it does still definitely come up where I am creating things in like a sculptural sense, but again, it's not in clay, so people don't necessarily probably think about that it is technically still you're sculpting something. So a lot of the time that's me sculpting things more in foam and thermoplastic and using heat instead of clay to create shapes. Like technically my entire Enfys Nest helmet would be considered a sculpture because that thing was completely made from scratch by me, just using heat to form the plastic to create that shape pretty much. So yeah, I enjoy sculpting a lot actually. On to the next one. What are you missing about not being able to do conventions this year, and what project has kept you going while in lockdown? Actually, for conventions, just speaking of lockdown, there was a convention I was supposed to go to that was like right on the edge of when lockdown in Ontario started, like to the point that it almost didn't get canceled. Like I was pulling out anyway, but like that's how on the edge it was. So I had like all of these really cool things planned. Like my Baby Yoda got invited. He was going to be like a special guest at the Rebel Legion booth. It was going to be such a fun time because it was like the biggest convention in Toronto, like post-Mandalorian, so Baby Yoda was going to be massive, it was going to be so cool and fun, and then of course it didn't happen. Which I'm not mad at all that it was cancelled. It was completely the right decision, and like I said, I was pulling out anyway for my own safety and health. But because of that, it does mean that Canadian Baby Yoda has never gone to a convention, and who knows when he's actually going to be able to make it to one. As far as what I miss about a convention, because I'm normally at a convention volunteering with one of the Star Wars costume groups, that is a lot of the time the only time I get to see a lot of those people and friends. So you do of course miss seeing and hanging out with them at a convention, and also making kids' days just by being dressed up as certain characters and having fun in costume as those characters. But overall, I'm really not minding the break. Not being worried about conventions means that I'm not really looking at making any more costumes other than the ones that I already was partway through building, which is a very long and entire other story. But because I'm not actively looking at making any costumes, it's left me all of this extra free time I use very loosely here because I sort of filled in my general costume building time that I normally would have had during the year with other stuff. But because I'm not looking at making any costumes, I've then sort of translated over to looking at more props, which is where the life-size droid props come in, and just general helmets, and just in general doing more prop work that might at some point, like especially the droids, might end up being displayed at future conventions, but just building more stuff for me and not worrying about the costumes and convention side of things. As far as what projects have kept me going, it really has been the palettes. It was so unexpected, and it's just sort of monopolized my entire summer, which actually worked out well because it meant that I didn't feel the fact that normally I would be taking like almost a month to 2 months off to create a new costume for Fan Expo Canada, which is normally at the end of the summer, like end of August, beginning of September. Normally I'd be making a costume during like July/August, so because I was so busy with the palettes, I really didn't notice the fact that I wasn't working on a costume, so the palettes definitely were what was keeping me going, but I am looking forward to getting back to some more prop building stuff just for myself because I find it fun. Next question. Can you talk about the different types of art you enjoy creating? I've seen some of the watercolor tutorials on Galaxies, but I don't know if you like to mix media or stick with specific types of media to keep them separate. Yeah, for sure. So I find myself being the most drawn towards portrait work. It just seems to be what my ideas generally are surrounding, whether that's in various styles, more surrealistic, Art Nouveau. Portraits are just my thing. I know, says the girl currently drawing a tiger, which I don't know what's gotten into me lately. I've been feeling less about the portraits and more about just random things to get myself drawing again. But portraits are normally my jam, and just general artwork that surrounds people. I just generally enjoy drawing things that a portrait involves, like hair, facial features, eyes, makeup, all of that kind of stuff. I just really like drawing, and so that's probably why portraits are my thing. Other than I also, when I was younger, drew a lot of fan art. I mean, I still do fan art, and most of the time, of course, that does surround the people in the fan art or whatever you are drawing. So that also possibly is what got me more into drawing people rather than like landscapes and other types of things. As far as medium choice go, I do think that mixed media probably describes my choices the best, because even if I'm doing like a watercolor painting that doesn't have any sort of ink line work or something, I am still grabbing normally like a gel pen or gouache or just an opaque white, because that's generally what I prefer to use and what I guess you could say fits my style, and that would of course classify that as mixed media because it's not 100% watercolor. The only thing that I sort of keep the single medium throughout the whole thing would be colored pencil work, but a lot of the time I enjoy using colored pencil on top of watercolor. Of course, for sketches they're generally more along the one medium sort of vein, but for the paintings that I enjoy doing the most, they would technically be classified as mixed media. On to the next topic. How did you turn your art into a career? Is it even your career? I am 12 and want to be an artist or animator, but everyone I've talked to about it has said I shouldn't waste my intelligence on such an unstable career. So yeah, lots to unpack here. Yes, I am technically a professional artist, although probably not exactly in the sense that a lot of people would think. I feel like if you say professional artist, people sort of automatically think about the concept of you're selling original works, you're trying to get into different galleries, museums, you're selling those pieces, that kind of thing, which is definitely not what I'm doing or have ever really strived to do. It was never something that ever interested me. It was kind of accidental. I don't know if you should really say accidental because that doesn't sound great for me, but for right now, my work is doing these videos. I do different types of commissions. I switch a lot, like I'm a very go with the flow type of person, so it does change constantly what I guess my job is. So for right now, it is these videos. I do a few different kinds of commissions, but they vary a ton. I have done like tattoo design commissions. I've done like more traditional type of artwork stuff. I've done different props for people. I'm doing some custom Funko figures soon. So commission is a very broad subject and term for something that is like so many different things. And of course, also lately I've become a bit of a businesswoman / shop owner with my store and creating and selling all of the different palette products. So being a professional artist does not equal like one path. And even for me, that's constantly changing. Like next year, maybe I'm like selling a whole bunch of different helmets or something. Like, I don't know, but I also like that because it keeps things interesting for me. And this is the type of work that suits me best. And I know that go with the flow kind of idea isn't for everyone. Like, people like to start a job at a certain time, end a job at a certain time, and know exactly what you're doing in that time that you are working. But at least for me, this is the most ideal situation I could have ended up in. Working for myself, calling my own shots, at least just from a medical standpoint. It is the most ideal situation for me to be in. And I think I have talked previously more of the logistics of how I turned this into a career, so I don't want to really touch on that too much. But what I wanted to talk about, which I thought was an interesting point, was the intelligence and I guess wasting your life on an art career sort of mentality. I guess that's sort of the harsh way of putting it, but I do think it's a viewpoint that a lot of people, even unintentionally, sort of create. I think a lot of the time, and in some cases, it is very true that creative people, you know, whether they were musicians, artists, whatever, like that was their thing. Maybe they weren't super successful in school, but music was always something they excelled at, or art was always something that they excelled at. And so unintentionally, this mindset that artists are only good at their one subject or craft and not, I guess, smart in other ways has become a bit of a stereotype, I guess you could say. And like I said, there are a lot of artists that I'm sure that was very much the case for them, and so they came prolific in their chosen area. But there are also a lot of different types of artists and entertainers that are very smart people. And the idea of, I guess, wasting intelligence on a creative career is something I have very much had experience in. Now, I really don't think that there's a good or humble way to say that you're smart, so I apologize for the next segment of this, but history would state that I appear to be a reasonably smart person, at least at one point in my school day lifetime. In school, I was a straight A student. I was pretty much good at everything, barely tried. I'm not sure how other countries or places work, but at least in Ontario, there's something called a gifted program in which many a teacher tried to ship me off into to get tested to see if I would qualify for it, which apparently they all felt like I would, but ultimately I kept turning it down, or at least my parents, both of us sort of kept turning it down because of essentially the added stress and also already being diabetic. Like, just being type 1 diabetic in a school setting is already a nightmare just health-wise for a variety of reasons, so added stress of an accelerated intelligence program, or whatever you would want to call it, was just not something that I needed at all. So yes, here I am, could have been doctor, lawyer, astrophysicist, whatever, living out my life as an artist. Which I was going to say my teachers would be surprised and or disappointed, but honestly I'm not sure if any of them would be, because I was always still a very creative person, so I feel like they might be more shocked if I had a more boring job. So at least in my case, I was really lucky and I didn't run into a lot of friction or concern. My family does tend to run on the more creative job side, so it was never an issue. Plus, I feel like my parents were like down to let me do whatever I wanted because they knew I wasn't like a complete idiot and could do whatever I wanted anyway. And like I have mentioned, it was a little bit of an accidental / gradual transition, so it's not like I just like woke up one day and informed them I wanted to be an artist. It was very much an accidental sort of fell in my lap sort of situation that they still can't entirely grasp that, you know, this is my job, making videos on the internet, making money in my sleep, as they like to put it a lot of the time. And also now the very much transition naturally into creating different products that they can see me selling out of constantly. So yeah, very supportive family, which is really nice, but I know a lot of people don't have that luxury all of the time, and it's not necessarily like a bad place or a mean place that it comes from. It is generally, I feel like, a place of concern because people think, I don't want to say narrow-mindedly, but when you hear that somebody wants to be an artist, a lot of the time they think about that gallery and original art selling situation, which is a very specific and I guess you could say elite group to be a part of. when really there are so many unique careers that fall under the umbrella of being an artist. So much of what we consume, see, buy, all of that has had an artist involved in some way. You know, there are graphic designers involved in designing packaging for all of the products that we buy. There's an artist involved in creating movie posters that we look at. I mean, there are just so many specific things. Like, I know you mentioned animator. That's obviously a specific career, and if that's something that interests you and fulfills you creatively, then that might be a great option for you. But maybe down the line you realize that something else might interest you more, like you could be a toy designer or like a figure designer for a company. You know, every action figure or Funko Pop or whatever has an artist behind that sculpt and design. Movies and TV shows have tons of different kinds of artists working on them, from concept artists, prop and set designers, just so many things. So being an artist as a career does not necessarily mean that you are sitting down and drawing or painting as your job. There are a lot of different forms that being an artist as a job can take on. Actually, that idea of being an artist equals sitting down and drawing and painting is something I've somewhat had to deal with recently myself when I was focusing and working on all of the different paint palettes and making them constantly. I was absolutely had no time, nor was deciding to draw or paint anything, and I was kind of freaking out of like, you know, what are you doing? You haven't made any artwork in so long, when in reality, technically, all of those different palettes are a form of artwork in some way. You know, their lids are painted. That is a painting. It is artwork. Just because you're not drawing something doesn't mean you're not an artist. Like, if you could be making pottery and that is an artist, like, they're not drawing every day necessarily, but it doesn't make them less of an artist. So yeah, just lots of things to think about. Being an artist as your job can take on a whole lot of different forms. And I'd actually love to hear your stories. If you're a professional artist, or maybe you're a part-time artist, make money with your artwork on the side, I would love to know what you do and how you got started doing it. Because like I've mentioned in my case, it was very unplanned, I guess you could say, and I was very lucky with how things just sort of ended up working out. But for those that it was a more planned and conscious decision, I would love to know how you got to the point where you're at in your art career. Yeah, pretty much the whole reason that I can call myself a professional artist is thanks to you all and your constant support for all of the various projects that I come out with. And that is going to be it for the questions that I answer in this video. Thank you again to everyone that had a question that they asked. I'm sorry if I didn't get to everyone's. If I hadn't, it's possibly because I've answered it before and just generally didn't have the time. I know this was a pretty long video, so if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one.